We'll start our detailed exploration of the Scrum framework with talking about the artifacts. As I mentioned earlier, an artifact is simply an object. The first artifact we'll talk about is the product backlog. Let's start with a definition of the product backlog from the Scrum Guide. The product backlog is an ordered list of everything that is known to be needed in the product. Again, it's a to-do list, but notice that it's not just a list, it's an ordered list. The Scrum Guide also says that the product owner is responsible for the product backlog, including its content, availability, and ordering. Keeping the product backlog in top condition is one of the most important tasks of the product owner. For the backlog to function properly, some of its items have to be assigned a higher order than the others. The higher the item on the list, the more timely it is, and the sooner it will be worked on. We'll cover this ordering in detail when we talk about the responsibilities of the product owner. For now, let's remember that the backlog is ordered with the most timely items on top. Here's an interesting question. How many backlogs can there be per product? If we have two Scrum teams working on the same product, do we have one backlog per team or one backlog per product? The answer is there is always one backlog per product. It's not called the team backlog, it's called the product backlog. Even if we have 5 teams working on the same product, they should all work from the same backlog. So, what does the product backlog actually contain? Well, plans for all the new features, of course. But is that the only thing? Actually, no. The product backlog is a lot more than the list of new features. The product backlog is the single source of requirements for any changes to be made to the product. Notice the wording, requirements for any changes to be made to the product. So it's not just the new features or new functionality. The backlog contains anything that changes the product. It can include bug fixes or modifications that are completely invisible to the user, like optimizing the code or upgrading the server. All that is a part of working on improving the product, and it needs to find its way to the backlog. When we start working on the product, we might have a very short list of items in the backlog, and that's okay. That's the beauty of Scrum. We can start working on the product even though we have very little information. The backlog will grow together with the product. As soon as we release the product, we'll get a lot of feedback from the users. Some of that feedback will end up in the backlog as new to-do items. So the backlog will quickly get bigger after the first release. That's a natural process. Let's take a look at the items in the backlog. The Scrum Guide is very specific about what they should include. The product backlog is composed of product backlog items, or in short, PBIs. They can be also called user stories because they're often submitted to the backlog by the users. Each PBI should have at least these 4 attributes: description, order, estimate, and value. You can, of course, add other attributes to the items. For example, the information on who submitted it, when it was added to the backlog, category, etc. If you have multiple teams working from the same backlog, you can add a team grouping attribute that will help distribute the items between the teams. That's a very useful technique. But the 4 attributes of description, order, estimate, and value are specifically mentioned in the Scrum Guide, so we'll concentrate on those. Description explains what the item is all about. A common way to describe the items is to use this format. As a type of user, I want some goal so that some reason. For example, as a site admin, I want to edit the purchase orders so I can update the customer email addresses if need be. We see three distinct pieces of information here: the user's role in the relation to the product, what the user wants, and why the user wants it. This format is not specified in the Scrum Guide, and your team can use any description format they want. But the advantage of this format is that it forces the users to give us some additional information that we might not have gotten otherwise. Again, it shows us who the user is, what the user wants, and why. The why part is especially important because maybe there is a better way to accomplish the same purpose that the user is not aware of. Let's take a look at this hypothetical backlog item. As an administrator, I want a shortcut button that copies the customer records to the clipboard so that copying the information into our invoice program goes faster. In this scenario, we have two separate databases of customers, and the administrator needs to manually copy the customer information from one program to another. The best solution the administrator can think of is to copy and paste using the clipboard. He doesn't realize that there might be a better way to do it. But knowing the reason behind this item, the developers can look at it and say, there is no need to copy and paste. We'll just sync the two databases so they always have the same information. If the developers didn't know the reason behind this item, they would have just added a copy button and missed a much better solution. So using this format for user stories can be very helpful. Now, I want to show you an interesting backlog item I saw recently. As an admin, I want to change customers so I have a better understanding. Wait, what? This is complete gibberish. What does it mean to change customers in order to have a better understanding? The thing is that this item should have never made it to the backlog with this description. The product owner should have, of course, gotten a clarification from the user who submitted it before adding it to the backlog, right? Okay, so we covered the description of the backlog items. Now let's take a look at the next attribute. Estimate shows how difficult it'll be to complete the item. This is usually expressed using an abstract measuring scale of story points. These estimates are an important part of the mechanism that helps the team know how much work they can complete during the upcoming sprint. The product owner meets with the development team at regular backlog refinement meetings to assign these estimates. The developers go over the topmost backlog items, clarify them, analyze them, and then assign each item a number of points indicating its difficulty. The development team is responsible for all these estimates. The product owner can help them understand the items, but since the developers will do the actual work, they should be the ones doing the estimating. We'll have a whole video explaining backlog refinement in detail. For now, just remember that the estimate indicates the approximate difficulty of the item measured in points. Seeing that a backlog can include hundreds of items, it's not necessary to estimate them all. The most important items are at the top of the backlog, and those are usually more clear and more detailed than the lower items. The last two attributes are order and value. Let's take a look at them. Order is the position of the item within the backlog. Value is the worth of the item from the business perspective. This attribute is assigned by the product owner based on his insights and knowledge. Notice that order and value are not necessarily the same thing. Sometimes the product owner might want the team to work on an item that has a lower value first, so he will put it higher on the order list. There can be many reasons for this, and we'll cover some of them later. We'll talk more about the artifacts in the next video. The product backlog is an ordered list of everything that can be needed in the product. Multiple teams working on the same product should work from the same backlog. Backlog items include the attributes of description, estimate, order, and value. Higher ordered items are usually clearer and more detailed than lower ordered ones.
Success is not the key to happiness. Happiness is the key to success. If you love what you're doing, you will be successful.